Six Screens Telenetwork, earning the reputation of giving all the right ingredients, uninhibited, in exposing the hard, cold facts about the Watchtower Society. And now, the end is near.
Well, my goodness, hello everyone. We're coming to our last program of the night. Well, that's Apostle Babe, Linda James. She burns the midnight oil all night long here on the Six Screens. And she's on with us tonight. So, Linda, how are you doing today?
Pretty good. I got
Well,
myself some new lighting, so I'm adjusting to the new lighting, but I love it.
Well, you're looking good and things are going good. The sound sounds really good. And I think you're going to have a really good program tonight. We still have a number of people listening in on our radio network and coming in via different platforms we're on. So I'm going to put the telephone number up on the bottom of the YouTube feed so people can see it and we can get people calling you up tonight. So anything that you might be thinking about tonight you want to talk about?
Yes, I'm going to be talking about pretty much along the lines of what we've been stating earlier today about the human rights and the different techniques that groups will use that gives you what it means to be in a cult and what makes it toxic. So I mentioned earlier the 8 criteria to totalism, which was by Robert J. Lipton. I'm going to go over those points and possibly the bite model, and going to start off with the Article 18 from the Human Declaration of Human Rights.
Excellent. Well, I'll be in the background if you need me. And it's not me snoring, by the way. I got a little
yes,
bed.
Yes, dear. Yes, dear. And I don't snore either. We have an understanding.
So we have a lot of people that listen into the Six Screens, and they fall asleep. So some of these people, Linda, I can't believe it. They come in and they listen to the very first program we do at 5:45, and they stay all night long. And they fall asleep. They can't get enough of it. But you know something? When I was leaving the Watchtower too, that might have been me. Because I couldn't get enough of. I wanted to hear what people had to say about the Watchtower. I didn't want to leave an organization if it still was the truth. I wanted to make sure that it wasn't. So hearing other people talk helped me. It validated it that it wasn't the truth.
Me too. And it took me a good 3 years of checking on this doctrine, checking on that doctrine, and I wasn't just going to believe something because somebody told me. I had to literally walk through each and every doctrine to be able to free myself and replace it with something else or nothing at all. So it's not just an easy shift. It takes a while.
Well, I wanted to ask you too, what do you think of Diasa's mother?
Okay, I just need her to be my new BFF because she's on it. She is on it, and I have great respect for those that understand the legal system, especially because that's where we keep getting knocked down, between the 2-witness rule and clergy-tenant privilege, and just, we walk away with the organization is allowed to do this yet again. And then we watch the organization change their rules just so that another country will, qualify them to get funds and so that they can be a charity in that country. Then they'll switch it around, and it's just so deceiving. I'm not sure what case they were talking about, but it reminded me of the case in Canada with, how that lawyer in Canada was just saying, the only thing that's different is we just don't talk about spiritual subjects. Really? That was wrong.
I'll tell you what. I mean, we have so many people calling into the program lately, Linda, and a lot of these people aren't even witnesses, but they're coming in. Diasa's mother. Earlier, we had on the program, on my news program, we had a man come in that wasn't a witness, but he's doing a little thesis.
Dave.
Yeah,
yes,
Dave, you were listening in.
Cannot wait to read it.
Yeah, isn't that something? So we get all of these. I think it's amazing. So we're crossing over and we're getting the attention of a lot of people because I'll tell you what the Watchtower has done to so many people and hurt them so bad, but even their relatives and friends suffer from it. So we're glad
Yes.
you're on with
Yes.
us, and looking forward to it. I see we do have some people listening in and making comments on the 6 screens. Well, on Facebook, Facebook and on YouTube. So keep
It's
going.
good to
I'm here
be
for
here.
you. Oh yeah, it's good.
Thank
Good
you.
to have you with us. You got a good way about you, Linda. You're doing good. Just keep cranking away at it. I'm here if you need me. I'll
Okay.
step aside.
Thank you
Yep.
so
Thank
much.
you. Yep.
So I just want to apologize first. I have sniffles. I've been fighting a cold for a few weeks, and so just kind of bear with me. But you know what's awesome is we actually get to say bless you when somebody sneezes now, right? That used to be a thing we were like taught not to do. We can't say bless you. We can't say cheers and all this stuff. So anyways, hello, I am Apostle Babe Linda James, your favorite apostate. And I'm really glad to be here tonight. And it's been so encouraging to listen to today's program talking about the things, people come across what we go through and they become allies. And that's just so, heartwarming that people can see the injustice. And once they find out the things that we have to deal with that are just so mind boggling, they want to support us and want to help us get through these times. Before, I would say about 30 years ago, I don't think people really had an understanding, but it has become more and more, people are becoming more and more aware. And I would say right about the time of 2000, right about that time when William Bowen came out on Panorama and Suffer the Little Children. Barbara Anderson was speaking out. William Bowen was speaking out. And then we ended up finding out about Candace Conti. And what was so wonderful about Candace Conti is her determination to get up and go again. And the way she approached things was, I can't let them get by with this. I don't want them to get by with this. So she would get up and go again and get up and go again and get up and go again. And that really was, I think, a gate opener that really has helped those that have come behind that situation and has helped more people come forward. If you ever notice, you'll hear things in the news or whatever that there's been some kind of a person that's been doing things, criminal activities, and once the first person shows up and says something, and if there's somebody else before Candace Conti, forgive me for not knowing who you are, but she's the first one in my brain that I'm thinking of. So, once that gets opened up, it's such an encouraging to the rest of us that have been victims, and it gives us the nerve to be able to stand up and say something. And that's really encouraging. It's not easy to, or even, it's actually, okay, a lot of us didn't even understand the things that was happening to us was actual abuse, okay? So to tell and to complain about it, why would we? It's just the way things were, it's just the way things were. That was how life is. So we were taught that spanking was discipline, and that was associated with disciple making. So it was actually a good thing, right? And then there's scripture used to don't spare the rod. So when Jeffrey Jackson was at the Australian Royal Commission, he was asked about spanking, and if you relook at it, before he answers the question and lies, he actually says, "Me personally, no." So, I still laugh about that today. But he was just trying to evade all kinds of responsibility of how the organization really did, really is, and his comment about how it would be presumptuous of us to think that we are the only ones when there could be other people in the congregation who could be, helpful and a representation. So he didn't quite, he actually did this little song and dance and acted as though anybody else in the congregation could be a representative as well, rather than only the governing body. So he had this really, planned out way of wording things that to where he would not have to be accountable. And I just love Angus, how he was, how he talked to him. He's like, well, I thought you were on the governing body and I thought you knew about these things, So this latest thing about Stephen Lett talking about the babies and that they're born into sin, and that because they're born into sin, that would actually make them enemies of God. So he gives this example of, how people will say, oh, look at that little angel. And then he says, more accurate, look at that little enemy of God. It's like, really? It's just, things like this are so mind-blowing that is said from the mouths of the governing body. But it's done strategically, it's done for a purpose. My opinion about that is basically to get in the way of bonding with your children. Or, and I've heard a lot of people talk about, maybe they'll have baptism sooner than how it's already been, which there has been someone in the Philippines that was 5 years old who got baptized, and that was written up in, that was brought up in one of my videos. And then there's a channel called Milestone Research. That's a really great channel if you get a chance to look it up. The host is named Charlie. He does an excellent job. Before he starts any of his videos, he knows exactly what he's talking about. And I'm noticing that he's getting more casual. His last video is just hilarious, where he actually does a little bit of a groove. So he is getting to he's coming into himself, just like all of us do. But yeah, when Auntie Fran and Uncle Joe was on the show earlier with Rick in his show, I was really pleased with what their nephew or brother-in-law, I'm not quite sure which. I thought it was a nephew, but then it sounded like he said it was a brother-in-law. He's actually a professor. And so we've got things going on all over the place. When a professor puts out a thesis, this is of, he's a someone, so his writings are going to be as though they're looked upon as being accredited instead of just an ordinary citizen writing out something. He also spoke to a therapist in California he was talking about, so he really did his homework and wrote out this thesis, and I'm really looking forward to to reading it. And it's something that I also look for on a regular basis, things that people write out regarding the Jehovah's Witnesses. A lot of it has been when I do look things up on blood transfusions and how the medical community can treat the patient with respect as they deny a blood transfusion. So kind of teaching how a nurse or a doctor is to treat a Jehovah's Witness, because it is against their religion. But of course, what has not changed is that once someone under 18 is needing a blood transfusion, the way things are is that they can be reported, and then that makes it to where the court can take custody away from the parents for enough time to give the child a blood transfusion. And what's so, which is a good thing, right? But what's so disturbing about that is that people within the organization have been taught that if a blood transfusion has been forced on them, it's as though they're being raped. So it's just so their thought process as their life is being saved is that is like this horrible rape, which is far from a rape. But it makes me think about stuff like that. So I wanted to talk to you about Robert J. Lipton. He studied people that were prisoners of war, and what it was that happened to where these prisoners of war would be considered brainwashed, which is not a term that is to be used, but it got translated into English as brainwashed. And if you can imagine like a chalkboard that has information on it, and it just gets totally erased and then replaced with other information, that's an example of what brainwashing is. It's like you once thought this, but now it's going to be thinking in another manner. And the way that you get from here to there, the techniques that are used to change your behavior and to change your thinking is very manipulative, and you have negative consequences. So it's very Pavlovian, and there was, so Pavlovian is, there was a doctor named Pavlov who was training a dog, and that's why I say Pavlovian. And he was doing this training process, and he would ring a bell when he fed the dog. And each time he fed the dog, he would ring the bell. Well, he came to find that if he rang the bell without feeding the dog still had anticipation of getting the food, even though the food didn't show up. And what he found was that the dog would salivate with anticipation of receiving this food. So that was something he had discovered, and that's had to do with how he could train a dog. So to be honest, a lot of the stuff that's used on us is very much because we get negative consequences or because we get positive consequences. When someone starts a Bible study, it's within the first 6 weeks that of the Bible study that's used when they use the Bible aid, that they give up their own way of thinking to the way of thinking that is suggested by the organization. And the way that's done is by gaslighting. So what they're telling them is that they should not think the way that they did, the way that they have all along, but rather think in a different way, which means their way of thinking is not reliable. So they'll use scriptures such as the heart is treacherous, who can trust it? The way that seems right to man leads to death and destruction. And it gets them to this point where they don't trust themselves. They don't trust their own decision making. And then they talk about how God has always used a person or an organization to speak to his people. And by the way, hey, we're that group, okay? So Jesus did an inspection, and out of all of the organizations on earth, he picked ours when Rutherford was president, right? That just always makes me laugh, because Rutherford was like, oh my goodness, Rutherford was amazingly, I would say, one of the most dogmatic presidents that we've ever had. And his ways were just so, either you do things my way or you're out, And many left under his presidency. About 75%, I believe, left. But he did build it back up. And much of the way the teachings are today is because of Rutherford. And by the way, you'll hear Judge Rutherford when you hear of Joseph Rutherford. He was never a judge. He did a fill-in at one time for a judge. So he ended up getting that term as a kind of a nickname, I can remember one of my kids' friends punched a tree one day when he was really upset, And so all of his friends started telling him, you're not supposed to punch the tree, you're supposed to hug the tree, right? So So they gave him the nickname as a tree hugger because he hit a tree when he was so mad. So Rutherford got this nickname kind of like, oh, Judge Rutherford, kind of bragging on him. And he decided to claim it and use it as his own title, which was not the case. He was never a judge. He just filled in, I believe, one time, maybe a few more times, and that was it. So I'm going to go into reading about Robert J. Lipton. This was also what helped Stephen Hassan, wake up from the time that he was in the Moonies. Robert J. Lipton had a book that he ended up finding out about, which helped to wake him up from being a Moonie. So I'm just going to start reading here. Dr. Robert J. Lipton, 8 Criteria for Thought Reform. Dr. Robert J. Lipton has these 8 criteria, and they are malure control, mystical manipulation, which is like a planned spontaneity, the demand for purity, confession, sacred science, loading the language, doctrine over person, and dispensation of existence, which is something I bring up all the time. The introduction here says, any ideology, that is, any set of emotionally charged convictions about man and his relationship to the natural or supernatural world, may be carried by its adherents in the totalistic direction. But this is most likely to occur with those ideologies which are most sweeping in their content, and most admirable, or I'm stumbling on words. Sorry guys, I have ADHD. Messianic in their claim. Whether a religious or political organization, and where totalism exists, a religion or political movement becomes little more than an executive cult, an exclusive cult. Here you will find a set of criteria, 8 psychological themes against which any environment may be judged. In combination, they create an atmosphere which may temporarily energize or accelerate, but which at the same time pose the gravest of human threats. I need to grab some tissue, excuse me. So the first one we're going to talk about is malure control, and that is spelled M-I-L-I-E-U, control. So the most basic feature is the control of human communication within an environment. If the control is extremely intense, it becomes internalized control, an attempt to manage an individual's inner communication. Control over all a person sees, hears, reads, writes, information control is added in here, creates conflicts in respect to individual anonymity. Groups express this in several ways. Group process isolation from other people, psychological pressure, geographical distance or unavailable transportation, sometimes physical pressure. Often a sequence of events such as seminars, lectures, group encounters, which become increasingly intense and increasingly isolates, increasingly isolated, making it extremely difficult, both physically and psychologically, for one to leave. Sets up a sense of antagonism, antagonism, antagonism with the outside world. It's us and them, closely connected to the process of individual change of personality. When you're talking about Malua control, it's actually changing an atmosphere. So if you go into a restaurant and you experience a certain atmosphere, that's the Malua. That's the, you might hear a waterfall and it might have a lot of greenery, and mainly there's sunlight coming in rather than a bunch of overhead lighting that's super bright. So that would be a control of how your environment is, which is which is why you often hear people say, why were kingdom halls made without windows? So and the thought is that so you don't look outside. So they're controlling what you will be focusing on. So the next one is called mystical manipulation, which is like planned spontaneity. Extensive personal manipulation seeks to promote specific patterns or behavior and emotions in such a way that it appears to have arisen spontaneously from within the environment, while it actually has been orchestrated. So Matt from Australia had just called in a little earlier, and he was talking about how the Watchtower will often say, Jehovah's hand was involved in this certain situation, whereas Matt made it very clear, no, it's because of how the law is, or it's because of how the court has handled things. That's the reality of it. But it's explained as though it was this mystical, wonderful thing that, Jehovah made happen. The next one is totalist leaders claim to be agents chosen by God, history, or some supernatural force to carry out the mystical imperative. So, as we've been told by the governing body, is that they were chosen by God. So if you hear someone say they are God or that they speak for God, that's cult 101. That's probably a cult, So be leery of those people that say they are God or that they speak for God. The principles, God-centered or otherwise, can be put forcibly and claimed exclusively, so that the cult and its beliefs become the only true path to salvation or enlightenment, which is exactly what we heard within the organization, that this is the truth. This is the only path that Jehovah is using, and every other spiritual group out there is quote-unquote false religion. We are the only true religion. So, and they made a big deal about you have to find the true one because all of the other ones are of the devil, right? Which they would label Christendom. The individual then develops the psychology of the pawn and participates in activity that's manipulated by others. How many times are we instructed on how to do anything within the organization? So that's an example of that. Next, it says the leader who becomes the center of the mystical manipulation, or the person whose name it is done, can be sometimes more real than the abstract God, and therefore attractive to cult members. Yeah, this is where the members will have a sense of reverence over these spiritual leaders. That's what this is talking about. Legitimize the deception used to recruit new members and or raise funds, and the deception used on the outside world. This is very, when we used to go to the door, we were actually trained to not claim that we were there to change their religion, but just simply there to share scripture with our neighbors, and but we were there to change their religion, or to get them to join our religion. And the reasons why we did that is because we were given the instructions that it was actually mandatory, that was a thing that we were expected to do by God. The next one is called the demand for purity. The world becomes sharply divided into the pure and the impure. The absolutely good, which is the group and the ideology, and the absolutely evil, which is everything outside of the group. Does this system of thing is being ruled by Satan the devil sound like this? I think so. One must continually change or conform to the group norm. So the way you walked in to the group is your ways are never okay. You have to change them. The way it's been spoken of lately is conform to God's standards. You have to bring yourself up to God's standards. It's not very come as you are. It's very, yeah, you can show up, but you better straighten yourself out in the process. One must continually change or confront the group norm. I think I just read that. Tendencies towards guilt and shame are used as emotional levers for groups that are controlling and manipulative influences. So I think we're all familiar with the shame and guilt. It's used all the time on us, that we're never good enough, that if we don't do this, that, and the other, we are displeasing Jehovah, and only if we do this, that, and the other are we going to please Jehovah. So there's a whole lot of shame and guilt. Simply, our identity is that we are filthy. We're just slaves. We're just filthy slaves. So this mindset of we're nothing without this organization. We're nothing within ourselves, but rather we're who we are because of what we are a part of. That's what makes us who we are, aka children of God, or however they refer to themselves, one of Jehovah's Witnesses. Once the person has experienced the totalist polarization of good and evil, black and white, thinking, he has great difficulty in regaining a more balanced inner sensitivity to the complexities of human morality. So it's very us and them. It's very, we're the good guys and everybody else is the bad guys. Our morals are superior. Yes, others might think that they have morals, but they're really not what pleases Jehovah. Only we're the ones that please Jehovah with our morals. It says that the radical separation of pure impure is both within the environment, which is within the group, and the individual. Ties in with the process of confession. One must confess when one is not conforming. So things such as what comes natural to teenagers, definitely teenage boys, they are finding themselves confessing, and then when they do confess, they're confronted with a bunch of guilt and shame, and that's really too bad, because that's pretty much a normal process of growing up, you know. But there's a lot of guilt and shame when it comes to young teenagers once they hit puberty and discover certain sections of their bodies which brings them pleasure, you know. They are very much guilted and shamed for that. So that keeps them in line as well. And it also gives the group information that they can use on you later. So it's really not all that helpful to confess. That there is scripture that says, you know, confess your sins one to another. And I myself will have conversations with people and express, you know, some of the stuff that I'm not quite proud of. But it's usually not associated with the other person shaming me, or I'm not bringing it up to the other person so that they would feel shame, but just simply say that I can identify, I get it, you know, me too. This is something that I go through as well. So that was under demand for purity. I know that within mainstream Christianity, they definitely did a lot with demand for purity. There was a time when fathers would give their daughters purity rings to save themselves for their for when they got married, and it seemed like a wonderful thing to do. But unfortunately, some of the daughters didn't end up, you know, keeping that promise. So when they did break that kind of vow that they had with their father, there was a lot of shame and guilt brought onto them. So there's that. And then the next thing we're going into is confession. Cultic confession is carried out beyond its ordinary religious, legal, and therapeutic expressions to the point of becoming a cult in of itself. Okay, seasons in which one confesses to one's sins are accompanied by patterns of criticism and self-criticism, generally transpiring within small groups with an active and dynamic thrust towards personal change. So a lot of this shame and guilt is to promote change, which in actuality, if we do feel guilt about something, you know, that is a motivator to change our behavior if we've done something we naturally feel guilty about. But when it comes to shame, that's very toxic. And it only works if you swallow it. So, you know, if you're chewing on your shame, just spit it out. Don't swallow it, okay? You don't have to swallow it. Let's see here. Confession is an act of symbolic self-surrender. It makes it virtually impossible to attain a reasonable balance between worth and humanity. That's kind of deep right there. It does take away your sense of self-worth. It does make you feel lower than low, and that's also part of, you know, relying on being dependent on the organization more so than your own self and your own decision-making skills, when they can make sure that you stay in that position. Next page. Every issue, we're still on confession. Every issue is one's life. Every issue in one's life can be reduced to a single set of principles that have an inner coerce, an inner, I'm not, this word is COHERENCE, coercion, to the point that one can claim the experience of truth and feel it. I'm going to read that again because I didn't quite get it. Every issue of one's life can be reduced to a single set of principles that have an inner coherence to the point that one can claim the experience of truth and feel it. So, okay. The next one, the pattern of doctrine over person occurs when there is, my phone does this thing where it just switches down and I have to bring it back up. So I'm going to start over again. The pattern of doctrine over person occurs when there is conflict between what one feels oneself experiencing and what the doctrine or ideology says one should experience. Oh, this one makes perfect sense to me. There was a lot of times when I didn't have a problem with certain things and it didn't affect my conscience, but the organization was saying that it should, and I just couldn't capture it. But and other times it really worked, you know. So that's another way of just keeping somebody really lowly and really dependent upon the organization. If one questions the beliefs of the group or the leader of the group, one is made to feel that there is something inherently wrong with them, or even question. It is always turned around on them, and the questioner, criticizer, is questioning rather than the questions answered directly. So if you ask someone in leadership position, you know, how does that work with this? Then they just switch it around on you and end up criticizing you for even questioning them. You know, how could you? That's showing pride. That's showing that you're not being submissive to instruction. All kinds of things can be said when somebody questions them. The experience of contradiction can be immediately associated with guilt. One is made to feel the doubts. The doubts are reflections of one's own evil. This one's a lot of us have gone through this. We hear this, we hear that, and it's being taught to us, but we begin to doubt. And if we doubt, it equals we must be evil for simply doubting, when that's really not the case. When you doubt, it's kind of like your intuition talking, which that's another thing. It's we're taught to not pay attention to our intuition, to not pay attention to what our body is telling us. So that's very, very, very key point. When doubt arises, conflicts become intense. So yeah, whenever you doubt the organization, oh no, it's a bad day for you. And this last one is dispensation of existence, which is one that I bring up a lot when it comes to shunning. Since the group has an absolute or totalist version of truth, those who are not in the group are bound up in evil, are not enlightened, are not saved, and do not have the right to exist. This is just mind-blowing because that's exactly what we grew up in. That's exactly the atmosphere that we were taught to have. Being versus nothingness. Impediments to legitimate being must be pushed away or destroyed. So your natural self, you have to push that away. Uh, you've heard of things like your fleshly desire and then your spiritual desire. So normal things end up being presented as evil, right? Okay. One outside of the group may always receive their one outside of the group may always receive their right to existence by joining the group. This is hilarious. So under dispensation of existence, meaning you don't have the right to exist, you can actually gain this status if you join the group, which is, of course, why we used to go door to door, right? Fear manipulation. If one leaves this group, one leaves God or loses their transformation, or something bad will happen to them. This is something that was really, really taught to us a lot. Leaving the organization is leaving God. A lot of stories would be told about those that left the organization, and they would be spoken of as the world just ate them up and spit them out, and they ended up homeless or in an alley, and with a needle in their arms, so they become drug addicts or prostitutes. You don't hear people within the organization talking about the success stories or the freedom one has once they leave the organization. They're only going to be bringing up examples of horrible things that happen to those that leave the group. Okay, and the group is the elite. Outsiders are of the world. Evil equals unenlightened, etc., which is exactly how we used to think. And yeah, so these are things that again, Robert J. Lipton learned when studying prisoners of war. So I'm wondering if any of this stuff is anything you can relate to. So we were talking about Robert J. Lipton's 8 criteria to thought reform. Malure control, mystical manipulation, which is like planned spontaneity, the demand for purity, confessions, sacred science. I don't feel like I read that one. Maybe I did. Loading the language. I don't feel like I read that one either, but I do remember reading Doctrine over Person. Let me see here. The mystical manipulation, demand for purity, confession, dispensation of existence. So evidently the things I copied I did not copy at all. So let me go over, I can recall talking about sacred science. Loading the language is loaded language that we often hear spoken of, which makes it kind of like the group's language, like they have their own language. So an example of that is when you hear 2 people talking that are Jehovah's Witnesses, and one asks the other, so how long have you been in the truth, and the other person will answer, since 1977 or whenever. But what they're really asking is, how long have you been a baptized member of Jehovah's Witnesses? Not the term, how long have you been in the truth? An outsider would hear that and not relate to what that even means, but an insider would know exactly what that means. So that's an example of loaded language. Loaded language in different groups is they take a certain word that society at large is familiar with, and they will either change the definition or keep the definition and then add more onto it. A good example would be the symposium from last summer, when they tried to convince their members that faith was actually something of fact, which it's not. So faith is a belief, and facts are facts, and they're very different. So that's an example of the loading of the language. And doctrine over person. whether something. Okay, I heard Jonas, goat-like personality, tell a story one time about one of his brothers. Okay, for some reason, the music that was playing at the Kingdom Hall, there's something that was happening within that music that was actually giving him. He was having like mini. What's the word? Where they pass out and they have I can't come up with the word, but I know you know what I'm talking about, where they kind of convulse and stiffen up. So his brother was having these. So the brother asked if, because it didn't happen when he listened to another type of instrumental for the kingdom melodies. So he asked if they could switch it to the type that doesn't give him seizures. That's the word I was looking for a minute ago, seizures. He would actually have seizures with these certain kingdom melodies that came on. Something within them, that certain version gave him seizures. So the person that they asked, that the brother asked at the Kingdom Hall if they could switch it so that he wouldn't have seizures, they write Bethel and ask if they can switch it up. And Bethel writes back and says no. So that's an example of doctrine over person. It's like, this is something that could easily be changed for this person so that he doesn't have seizures. But no, they weren't going to change it because the doctrine comes before the person, and it always will. Yeah, so those are the 8 criterias to thought reform. So I'm going to read them again. The first one was malura control, which is a control of your environment. Mystical manipulation, which is kind of like planned spontaneity. You might recognize it when, there would be tent revivals that some people would have, and there would be these grand healings, and a lot of times they were planned, that somebody was paralyzed, but now they can jump up and dance around the church, so that's a planned spontaneity, which in actuality, that falls under mystical manipulation, and they weren't parallels. They were not paralyzed to begin with. So the demand for purity, confession, sacred science, and loading the language. Doctrine over person, and dispensation of existence. I don't know if I went over sacred science. Basically, sacred science is the doctrines of the group or the organization. It's considered sacred, so you can't really question it. And they call it science to give it more legitimacy, but in actuality, it's just simply the teachings of the group, the principles and practices that they use. So if anybody wants to call in, the number is 727-731-6701, and can mention any of these if they can recall experiencing any of these during their time within the organization, and even if you're still involved in the organization, if they recognize any of these techniques by Robert J. Lipton, please give me a call, because I would love to hear what stood out for you. Is there anybody there who wants to chime in?
Hi, Apostle. Yeah.
Hi.
I was just going to say how much I appreciated you reading and talking about that. I've done a lot of research in the totalitarianism in the organization, and you really nailed it. You did an amazing job.
Well, thank you. I just read what Robert J. Lipton did. May I ask your name?
This is Tracy.
Oh, okay. Hi, Tracy.
Okay. Hi.
Hi.
So I have a couple of extra thoughts if you'd like to hear them.
I do, yes.
Okay, well, I thought one of them is the totalitarianism. It's very important that us against them. And so
Yes.
it's a division of personalities. They often call themselves the truth. Now, that's not just with the Watchtower. That's with all these cults that have a totalitarian-like focus, which is really, it's funny that there are so many that replicate it. Also, another thing is that they often they become like the high personality. So what that does is the group all tries to conform to a certain way of existing, and if they fall out of that, like let's say when we were talking about the mask mandate and stuff, and we saw that a lot of people, if they didn't wear masks, and everybody got offended, and they would start yelling at them, or at least here in Washington State, it's very liberal here. But, and another thing that I thought was really important is shunning is actually the most significant military tactic there is. In fact, of all, I mean, they could torture people, they can hurt them, they can do whatever they want, but it's actually the isolation that can break the hardest criminals. I would have never thought of that.
Yeah.
Another thing, if you want me to continue, I don't want to talk too long.
Oh, no, I love what you're saying. I just wanted to add on, if people are in prison and they get put in the quote unquote the hole, they're isolated. And that's like they come out a different person, and like they're broken. It really psychologically affects them. Yes. Please go on. Yeah.
Okay. Another one is in cults, the number one easiest behavior that could change is language. And so the first thing that they change when you start going to a cult or this totalitarian type of group is a language. So you say worldly or, whatever it is, or the truth or whatever it is. The language is our easiest behavior to change. So I thought that was really interesting.
It is. And it's so amazing because worldly is almost considered a compliment in society at large. It's like, oh, you're so worldly. It's a compliment. It means they're well educated. They've, done some traveling, and they're pretty savvy. Within the culture we came from, it means really bad. We're not of the world. You're of Satan. Such a big difference, right?
Right. And another thing that was really interesting is it's, which never even occurred to me before I read up on what totalitarianism is that in hypnosis, all they have to do is have like an article that has like a fear, they put fear, and then they love on you. So, or an image that, let's say that they have an image where there's everybody being destroyed and these horrific images, and then they have a next image that everybody is loved and happy. People don't realize that actually causes a hypnosis state. I would have never thought that.
Right. It's almost a deassociation. Even kind of, and this hypnosis is kind of like it puts you in a daydream state, like daydreaming, not quite, falling down and passing out. But you're right; those two things, they're contradictory. But it's terror, and then it's love, terror and love, and that doesn't live in the brain very well at all. So how
that's right.
It makes you kind of turn your eyes to the left or the right and try to make sense of it. And that's that portion that puts you in that state of hypnosis that you're talking about, that I've noticed is somewhat like a daydream state, like just kind of wandering off. Yeah.
Anyways, okay, well, it was so great calling in, and you're doing fabulous. I just love your show.
Oh, thank you. I'm so glad you called in, and I'm glad you are aware of this stuff too, because I think the more we become educated, the more we will not fall for it again. It's very easy for us to fall for it again, but if we're educated, hopefully we don't. And actually, it's very common for us to, do what is called cult hopping, because we don't realize that we're being bamboozled again. We don't realize we're being deceived again, because that's what the organization has to use to recruit us. They don't come to us honestly and say, listen, you'll be signing up for all this, you know, horrible stuff. They make it look like you're going to see your dead loved ones and everything. So we end up learning quicker. We end up recognizing quicker. So yeah, thank you so much. And now, was it you that was on the show with Jimmy Bell?
Yes, it was. Yeah.
You with the microphone. You have microphone issues, which is so too bad.
It seems like I always have voice issues because I kind of sound like a squirrel. So, you know.
Well, you did sound, we could hear you today, and that was super nice to hear. So good for you on that. Good for you. Thank you for calling in.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. That was cool to hear. This is the thing, and by educating ourselves on these techniques and tactics, which have nothing to do with like teachings from the Bible, you know, to me that's what freedom of religion is. If they want to believe that Jesus is Michael the Archangel, that's freedom of religion, okay? But the tactics and techniques that were used to get someone to believe that Michael is Jesus, that's the things that we're talking about here, that manipulate people to behave in a certain way. And of course, this links to easily to the BITE model, which is behavior control, information control, thought control, and emotional control. And that emotional control is, I think, the toughest, because I think that is what we find ourselves getting, or how we get triggered, you know. And the guest that was on this last show, just before mine, after the storm, Diasis had his mother come on, who was familiar with the law, you know, and she just kept saying, the courts do not care how you feel. It's not about your feelings. It's about what is law. It's about your human rights, you know. So she kept stating that, and I thought that was just so smart, because we do get emotionally triggered. We get emotionally hurt, which are normal things, but they don't amount to much in court, you know, or they don't amount to much when we're trying to share and expose what is so sinister about this organization. If we're saying it with a whole bunch of emotion, which let me just say, I would like to sometimes, okay? I mean, there are days when I would just want to rant, okay? I'm ready to turn the camera on and just be like, let me just tell you, and have attitude and emotion and all this stuff. But, you know, and many could identify with that. But when you're stating it without that, it's actually received better. So that's a good thing. Was there anybody else that could identify or recognize any of these tactics or techniques by Robert J. Lipton from when they were in the organization, or even any other group? Because these things could be used in the PTA, like Parent-Teacher Association. These things could be used in a bowling group, you know. So yeah.
Hello, Linda.
Hi, how are you?
Good. Well, doing okay.
I'm so glad you called in. I was going to invite you to join me, and then I thought, I got to figure out how to send you all this information. By the way, everybody, this is our Pete. This is Pete from XJW Curious. I'm so glad you called in, hon. How are you?
Yeah, hanging in there. I really love the topic you're on today, because you know the last few days have been a kind of down period for me today, and what I realized over the years is that every year around this time, I tend to go into a unconscious depression, and I could never
Yeah.
figure out why it was until I talked to somebody who pointed out to me that this particular week of the year was the week that my mother would have celebrated her birthday. Of course, she's been gone for 24 years, but that so there's a reminder of my mother, who I miss a lot.
And how old would she have been today?
She would have been 100 today.
Ooh, yes.
Getting old. Why I haven't aged a bit. But,
no, you haven't, darling. You have not aged a bit.
yeah. But today is the 52nd anniversary of my baptism as a JW. And
yeah.
In hindsight, look back at how that all happened and what the effect on my life has been. I mean, to say that they're a cult is probably the grossest understatement ever. The whole thing is they recruit and they target the recruitment towards people who are emotionally vulnerable. That's why their number one line is, don't you want to see your loved ones in an eternal paradise? Which is something they cannot possibly verify. It's just a promise, that they can't keep. But when people are emotionally vulnerable, they take advantage of that, and they, that's the into the organization. And then
absolutely,
once you've gotten into the organization, they push you towards baptism. Oh, in order to really please God, to really please Jehovah, you have to do this and this and this and this. And you go right down the steps and you follow everything that they tell you to do. And then when you get baptized, oh, by the way, now that you're baptized, you can't take blood. Because they don't tell you that beforehand. They don't present you with
I think you're right.
until you're baptized. So
okay.
And everything is incremental. And getting this fellowship when I did was probably the best thing that ever happened to me. And now looking back, for the longest time, I was just happy just being out. Out of the organization and just being free of their rules. And, and it wasn't until I watched, something on the Australian Royal Commission, that sparked me into doing the YouTube videos and stuff, to help warn other people about it.
I'm so glad to hear that, because your videos have just been one after another incredibly informative. You're not the usual YouTube content creator when it comes to the Watchtower. You're pretty phenomenal as far as your accuracy and on how the Watchtower teaches things. And then you give another perspective of, wait a minute, they're deceiving you. That's not correct because of this, that, and the other. And you're so good at that, just tearing it apart. Thank you.
I appreciate that. All I'm doing, when I said, when I decided I wanted to make videos, it's like, what do I do? How do I approach this? And I watched a bunch of, other XJW creators to see, how they were doing their videos. And there were some that just rant and rave, and there were some who will, suggest information but don't really pursue it. And it's like, but the ones that I enjoyed watching were the ones who had legitimate information. And that's what people need. Like, if there was YouTube 52 years ago giving out the information that we're giving out, today, I never would have gotten baptized. You know, I
Yeah.
don't think their organization would have ever grown to the point where it is if this information was available 50 years ago.
Yeah.
So what I do when I, make my videos is I'm just trying to present information that I wish someone had given me. And that's probably, in my view, that's probably the most important thing I can do.
I love that. I do enjoy it.
Ground, somebody is walking towards you. Don't say, you don't tell them what, you don't ignore the fact that there is a danger. You point out, hey, there's a hole there. Don't step there.
Yes.
So it's just, basic human decency to help warn people about a bad situation.
Yeah, it's the exposure is huge. I was talking earlier about when I was realizing, like, it was starting around 2000, with William Bowen and Barbara Anderson and others as well, and it's just become more and more and more and more as time. We're now in 2022, so within like the last 20. Matter of fact, this is actually the anniversary. They wanted to come out with their videos in 2001, but then 9/11 hit in 2001. So their shows that were going to air in 2001 ended up airing in 2002. So this is actually the 20-year anniversary, and where it has come from there is amazingly huge. I mean, we've got Reddit, we've got groups on Facebook, and we have toxic people that left a toxic organization. So sometimes it's a little bit much, but as we learn to realize what's healthy for us and what's not, we become less involved in toxic situations. But to begin with, we're kind of used to them because that's what we were involved in, So, yeah.
Yeah, I joined in a little earlier. I was watching your program, and you were talking about, oh crap, my mind just went on me. Anyhow, you're talking, I believe, about like some of the hypocrisy that's in the organization and how they instill guilt and fear. And, somebody once said that, witnesses are in a fog. Is fear, obligation, and guilt, and that's what drives, a witness. And I remember as a teenage boy, as you were talking about teenage boys, long time ago, I was one myself, and I remember all the the prodding and don't do that, you're gonna go blind.
Right.
Like I was right, and so I was programmed that which is a totally natural thing, was totally
yes, it is.
And Jehovah frowns upon that. And like the first time, I remember one time I was in the bathroom, probably for a little longer than I should have been. My mother was knocking on the door, and she says, Jehovah knows what you're doing in there, and he doesn't like it. And I said, well, if he didn't want me doing it, he wouldn't have put it within reach.
Right.
But I was shocked that years later, I looked in the, Shepherd the Flock of God book, which is the secret elder's manual.
Yes.
And like masturbation is not a disfellowshipping offense because it is not considered parousia. And I said, wait a minute, all these years they were programming into me that this is an evil, disgusting thing, and you can't even get this fellowship for it? What the heck?
That's terrible. I mean, I'm glad to hear it, but I hear some people have to have a calendar, and then they got to answer to the elders, and cross out days that they've, didn't withhold. And it's just like this whole thing where they have to go back to the elders and answer to them in shame, Oh, it's so horrible. If they can find anything to shame us on, they're going to find it.
And they do it with everything. Like, I'm old enough to remember a time when there was no such thing as video games. So when the first, games were coming, I remember when like Miss Pac-Man came out. Now, Miss Pac-Man is probably as benign a game as you could possibly get. It's literally just dots, running around the screen. And Watchtower put out an article that said it was demonized because there were ghosts, and it showed cannibalism because the purpose was to eat all the dots.
Oh my God.
Like, to go to extremes at that level, to try to convince people. And the only reason that they were against video games is because that would take time away from, studying their literature.
Anything that takes the time away from a narcissist is going to be demonized.
Yep.
Absolutely.
Excuse me, Pete?
Yep.
Hi,
Tracy.
Oh, this is Susan, Rick's wife?
Yes.
Oh, Susan. Hi, Susan.
Hi. You just mentioned something that I thought was very clever, and I hadn't heard this before. It was the word fog, and it was fear, something, and guilt.
Obligation.
Obligation.
Yes.
I think that says it all.
Yeah, they instill the fear of Armageddon. If you don't follow Jehovah's path, you will be destroyed at Armageddon. And then, as they teach us, they refer to the scripture that I believe it might have been in one of the letters to Timothy, where it's like Christians have to put on the new personality. So we have this obligation to cast away everything we've known before and to become like this new person, and then there's the guilt that, if you're so weak that you give in to these feelings, or if you're so weak that you can't do more for Jehovah, then you're a weak person. So, I mean, it's all, fear, obligation, gaslighting.
The obligation, in my personal circumstance, I was so overwhelmed with obligation. I had a book study in my house for 15 years. I felt obligated to make it spotless every Tuesday night. And my clothes looked perfect. I was under this perfection thing. So, we put it on ourselves, of course, but other people kind of make us feel that way. The talks make us feel that way. They don't come right out and say it all the time, but they'll be the scripture. Don't you believe that? Yeah.
The Tuesday night book studies were my favorite because the sister whose house we used to have our book studies at, she always used to make this banana nut bread, so like after the book study, she'd break out the banana nut bread and coffee, and it would turn into a little chit chat. And she made the best banana nut bread. That was definitely the highlight of my night. That was my favorite meeting.
People over until almost 10 o'clock every Tuesday night, and I was making quesadillas and just my goodness. But it was work too, though. After a while. After 15 years, I said, I'm done.
Yeah, I don't blame you for that.
No.
Now that we've distanced ourselves from the organization and we look back, isn't it amazing what we put ourselves through?
I don't think if I would have known what I know now, I would have never taken the jump. But I was a teenage kid when I got baptized. I wasn't even born in. Someone caught me door to door, and I just fell for it. I had to talk to my mom. Yeah.
So I
Yeah.
was looking for something, and I found it at the Kingdom Hall, which was friends and mom-like figures. So that's what
Right.
attracted me.
Yeah, that's like, I was raised by a single mom back in like the 60s when that wasn't a cool thing. And so, I was kind of ostracized from the other kids just for that fact alone. You don't have a dad, And so when the Jehovah's Witnesses came along and talked to my mother, and was like promising this paradise earth, and we get to see all our loved ones, and everybody, we're all going to be brothers and sisters, and we're all going to love one another. My mother, like, hook, line, and sinker. Wow, that sounds great. And, and I was like, yeah, that sounds really cool. And so I got baptized when I was 9, and then of course when the kids at school found out I was a Jehovah's Witness, I got ostracized even worse. So that kind of backfired on me. There's no worse social pariah than a child Jehovah's Witness in school.
Did you have friends at the Kingdom Hall?
Oh yeah, But here's the thing: as when you're 9 and 10, you're just all a bunch of kids of the same age group, and your goals are pretty much the same. But once you get into your teenage years, teenagers get to be very judgmental. They're very, shallow, very judgmental, and the personalities start to change. And I kind of looked around and realized that, wow, the people in this congregation, what a bunch of hypocrites. And it wasn't even just the kids, it was the adults too. Like, I committed the sin of wearing a leisure suit to a meeting once. And immediately after the meeting, I had an elder come over my house and counsel me that leisure suits are a creation of the devil because they're made by homosexuals. And I said, oh, not this one. This was made by one of the sisters in the congregation, But the whole time this guy was looking, counseling me on clothing, I'm looking at him knowing that he was a wife beater. So it's like, really, which sin is worse? And then basically, who are you to be counseling me on this matter when you're doing that? And that's when it came, kind of to a head that this, after all is said and done, Jehovah's Witnesses are just like any other group of people. There are good people and there are bad people, and there's a leadership that's going to try to lead them down whatever road they want, and there are going to be emotionally vulnerable people who are willing to be led. But we can nitpick about beliefs or doctrines, but in the end, it's all the same. It's just another group of people.
Well, what's interesting is they try to make certain so-called sins worse than others. When the Bible doesn't have a list of what's worse than others. A sin is a sin. It doesn't matter what sin it is. Lying and murder are just about equal. Although murder is worse, but these other things, they're not. There's no hierarchy of sin.
Yeah, the first time I ever heard the concept of theocratic warfare, it's like they were talking about something with a battle that they had with the government. They said, and what they said in court was an obvious lie. And so, I questioned one of the elders. I said, why did they say that? That's a lie. And he says, what's theocratic warfare? Because the Watchtower says it's okay to lie because some, people or some organizations aren't worthy of knowing the truth. And I'm like, yeah, but I'm thinking the 10 Commandments. There's one that says something about thou shalt not lie. You know? So, I mean, and there's no, like, caveat to that. It doesn't say thou shalt not lie unless you're, participating in theocratic warfare. It's a pretty definitive do not lie, yet the Watchtower supports lying in certain situations. And to me, you can't have it both ways.
Well, some people say, well, that's just a little white lie, but a lie is still a lie, even if it's
lies.
small.
Lies don't have colors.
No, they don't. They don't.
That's a chartreuse lie. Oh, that's just a cerulean lie. Lies don't have colors. It's a lie or it's not. It's very binary.
It's very true. Did you ever give your experience of how you became a witness?
Oh, yeah.
You have? Because I don't remember hearing that. Did you?
Well, the long and the short of it was, I was born and raised Catholic. I was Catholic up until I was 8 years old, and when I was, as I said, I was, raised as a, raised by a single mom, and I had an older brother, but he was out of the house by the time I was 4. So from 4 years old on, I was an only child, and my mother didn't like me to play with the kids outside because I was kind of sickly as a kid. So, and as a result, I stayed in the house a lot and read books. And the biggest book we had in the house was, a big old Catholic Bible. And so, I would just sit there and, read out of that sometimes, or I'd pick up an encyclopedia and read. And, I read the 10 Commandments. I went, that's a pretty good set of rules there. That's, So when I got into Sunday school, one day the nun said that the Father was going to grace us with his presence in the class, and if we had any questions, we could ask. And so, when it was my turn to ask a question, I said, are we supposed to follow the 10 Commandments? And he said, yes, we are. And I said, well, the 10 Commandments say that we're not supposed to bow down before graven images, yet everywhere I look in the church are graven images. And we kneel before a graven image of Christ on the cross to take communion. And he's like, do you have any other questions? Typical evangelist type thing. If you don't like the question you're being asked, ask for a different question. And so I said, well, in the Gospel according to St. Matthew, Jesus tells us not to call each other Father or Rabbi, and yet we call you Father. Why do we do that? He says, well, it's a sign of respect. I said, yeah, but Jesus tells us not to do that. And he goes, what's your phone number? And about 20 minutes later, a very irate mother of mine came and picked me up. And, she said, what did you do? And I said, I asked questions. And she said, it couldn't have been that bad. And I said, well, So when we got home, she called the rectory and told asked the father, what did, he do that was so bad? He says he just asked questions. And the priest said, yes, but we cannot have children questioning the authority of the church. And my mother basically said, well, I don't think we're going to be Catholic very much longer. So that's, how I left the Catholic Church. And my mother's best friend at the time was a JW. So, when my mother told her the story, of course, the JW jumped right in and, sunk the hook in the target.
And the rest is history.
The rest, as they say, is history, yes. And now here I spend an occasional Saturday night with a pasta babe on Rick Farron's Six Screens Network, sharing time with all my favorite people, the other apostates from the Jehovah's Witness cult.
I was like you when I was in the Catholic Church. I was about 8 or 9 years old. And again, the priest graced us with his presence. And we could ask any question we wanted. And they put it in a bag. And he stuck his hand in and he was going to draw out a couple questions. So you were asking them, how did you become a priest? And where did you, go to school? And, just dumb questions like that. Well, I wanted to know what hell was. And I said, what is hell and where is it? And he looked at it and read it and he said, we'll save this one for later. And he folded the paper and put it down on the desk. He never said it. And I knew I wasn't going to get an answer. And I was disappointed because I had always wanted to know about hell. I wanted to hear it from the horse's mouth. Nope, you're going to get it.
Well, if you want to know where hell is, it's in Secaucus, New Jersey.
Oh. I thought it was New York City.
No. New York City is, New York City is just big and there's a lot of people. But, I've been to New York City and I enjoyed myself there. I've been to Secaucus, New Jersey, and there is nothing to enjoy in Secaucus.
I just heard that the crime in New York has gotten really bad. People are kind of moving out of there.
Oh, yeah. Oh, I see Esther in the chat. Yes, this is me, Esther. Esther's saying, I recognize the voice. Is this Pete? Yep.
I was going to have you come on, and I waited till too late, and I thought, I got to send you everything that I'm going to be talking about. And then I was like looking at the clock going, oh no, I have to finish putting my makeup on. But I really had you in mind. I'm so glad you showed up. So glad.
Always a pleasure.
Oh, I thought I heard somebody else. So Pete, what made you tune in tonight? You just were going to come in with Linda?
No, actually, I've been under the weather the last couple of days, and I went to bed early in the night. But as us old men do, we get up in the middle of the night to go to the bathroom, and so after I took care of that, I said, well, let's see what the Apostle Babes are doing on the show today. And I hopped on the internet, and here we are. Yeah.
Wow.
Good show. Good show, and to see you didn't need me for this.
But I like having you around. I like it. Yes, I do.
Well, it's nice to be had around. If that makes any sense.
Yeah, I know you've been.
There's still people out there that don't mind my company.
Yeah,
because most of my conversations end with somebody shaking their head, walking away, going, "What the hell?"
Esther just reassured me that yes, makeup is always first. If Esther says so, it's correct. Thank you so much, Miss Esther.
Rick cannot understand why more women don't come on the video suite. And I said, Rick, unless we have our full war paint on, we're not showing up. Just not going to happen. Because he call somebody and make him. He doesn't get it. He thinks you just show up, and he doesn't understand women need to put their makeup on, have their hair at least decent. And
women. I mean, man, women work so hard to present themselves in an acceptable manner. Women take pride in what they look like, how they present themselves, and that's why men T-shirt and jeans, and it's like, okay, everything's covered, let's go. Men and women are just two totally different creatures. Our attitudes about everything is different. And personally, I can't understand how the human race ever grew to where it is, because women are very, what's the word I'm thinking of? They're very intellectual, and nothing a man does is intellectually logical. So I can't understand why women want anything to do with men. But apparently, I guess that's why, how we ever got to have a population this big is beyond me.
Well, I have to tell you, Rick is my best friend, and he says I'm his best friend. And if we were made to be compliments to each other, Rick and I compliment, because we're just best friends to each other. And that's just the way it is. We just compliment each other.
Yeah, that was the same thing with, my ex-wife. When we first met, we were almost like sparring partners. We both had the same type of acerbic wit and, sarcasm. And so we would just sit there and, kind of bounce off one another. And, we really were, the best of friends before we got married. People used to think we're almost brother and sister because we're so much alike. So, the friendship thing that's very important. I was just talking to one of my... I was just talking to one of my neighbors today, and I, said to him, the heart can't help who it chases after. The heart's going to do what it wants, and so, it defies all logic or all reason. When the heart sees something it wants or someone it wants, it's going to go after it. And we're just along for the ride.
Yeah. Well, I think it's good to be friends first. And then if you
absolutely.
go to something more, that's fine. And we can have friends of both sexes. But if you don't have the friendship, how are you going to live with one another?
Well, that's it, To have a relationship that's just based on, like, the sexual attraction, it's not going to last. Because let's
how many hours is that a week? It's how many hours a week, okay? The rest of the time you have to live with the person. So, so do the math.
Yeah, it's that's a small part of it,
Yeah.
And especially once you introduce kids, those evil enemies of God, into the conversation, then your sex is almost non-existent unless you have an appointment.
It's called planning. Planned spontaneity. It was under the, 8 criterias of by Lipton that I was just reading.
And that's not even a guarantee, because, let's say that all the stars align and she's feeling good and you're feeling good and the kids go to bed early and, everything's getting ready and you start a little hugging and kissing, and inevitably there's the pounding on the door. Mommy, I'm thirsty. But yeah, kids are definitely evil. I agree with Steve on that. Well, no.
Wait a minute. What did you just say? Say that again, Pete. But what? Kids are what?
I said, I agree with Steve on that, except I don't think babies are evil. Only kids who can knock on the door when you're trying to get with your wife. Those are the evil kids.
Okay. Oh gosh, this is great.
I had more of a problem with my in-law, my mother-in-law.
Oh.
Oh my goodness. This is my first marriage.
Yeah.
The first 10 years we were married, the first 10 vacations we took, my mother-in-law came along. She went with us everywhere. And finally I said, you know what? Next year, go wherever you want. Could care less. Leave me home. I'll keep the kids. You go with your mother. Have a good time. And I was done. I wasn't going to do it anymore.
Yeah, I don't
He
blame
couldn't understand. Well, he couldn't understand why it was so hard. But put yourself in my place. We ate where she wanted to eat. We'd see what she wanted to see. We'd do what she wanted to do. And I might as well have just been a shadow. You know, and it was nice when we had the kids when they were little, I guess. But it was a third wheel, and it just did not work. Didn't work for me anyway.
No, and we got to look out for number one. Yeah, no doubt about that. My mother-in-law, well, everybody knows my mother-in-law. She goes by the name Satan.
That's cool. That's almost creepy.
No, without a doubt, she's
Oh God!
the most human being I've ever met. Yeah.
How so? Please share.
I think Linda wants.
I would love to hear some enemy of God characteristics. Yeah, but can you give us a example or what you mean by that?
Enemy of God characteristics. Who, of children or of my mother-in-law?
Mother-in-law.
Oh.
This ought to be good. I mean, if you're okay sharing it, if you feel like you'll be gossiping, then never mind. But it's up to you.
Well, here's the thing with my mother-in-law. Okay, and you hear comedians do mother-in-law jokes and everything like that. With my mother-in-law, though, it's not funny. Like, she is legitimately an evil person. Like, she's psychotic, she's controlling, narcissistic. She is evil. Everything she has ever done, is just pure evil. There are no redeeming qualities in her. She's incapable of expressing love, showing love. And so, I mean, I joke around about, 99% of the stuff I talk about, but when it comes to my mother-in-law, no, the woman is pure evil. And, it's not trying to be funny.
Was she evil towards you or your wife or you or
everybody? That woman destroys every life she touches.
Wow. Yeah, I can hear it too.
All grew up with major issues.
I really hear it.
Her husband, had died a broken man. And the day that she disappears off the face of the earth, the world will become a better place. And it's really sad that there are people that are like that, and I don't know the pathology of how she got to be that way. But she has. Like, she can't even fake being nice. Most.
Wow.
Even the governing body will look at you and smile as they're lying to your face. Oh, no, she's not going to pretend anything. She is just pure evil.
Oh my goodness. Okay, you don't even have to tell a story. I can hear it. Wow, I can really hear it. Wow.
It's she as a matter of fact, my oldest boy called me today and said that, you know, she's trying to call and get information about, you know, my ex-wife. My ex-wife's in the hospital. So, you know, she's trying to call and get information, and it's like, I don't know. Nobody's telling you anything. And my son notified the hospital if she called, she would know nothing. You know? And they go, why?
It's that kind of a person. Oh, wow.
And it's, you know, she's only trying to gain information that she can use to her benefit.
It's hard to see why she's alive. I mean, for what purpose?
Well, evil doesn't die, does it? They say only the good die young, and I have a feeling that, you know, only my mother-in-law and me will be immortal.
Wow.
That's going to be one hell of a battle.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah. They're both like the Highlander, but there can only be one.
Wow.
And people like this that you're talking about often are this way without any shame. It's like, it's without no shame at all. Like, and they'll actually experience joy from your pain.
I've known this woman now for 40 years, and I have never seen her even attempt to crack a smile.
Oh my!
Never.
Wow.
You know, it's just, yeah. You've got to have some type of a sense of humor somewhere. If you don't have a sense of humor, that, you know, why are you here? And she doesn't.
Well,
if I ever hear my mother-in-law go, "Hey, want to hear a joke?" I'll just drop dead right then and there.
It's so out of character for.
I have no idea. I don't know if it was something in her upbringing or something that happened to her along the way, or, you know. Because, I mean, I've met, like, her brothers and sisters, you know, and they're, like, nice people. So it's like, I don't know. I don't get it. Was she adopted? Was, you know, she found under a rock? I don't, alien, maybe she's an alien implant. I don't know, but it's baffling.
There's a false sense of empowerment that shows up when somebody has that kind of a attitude in it. It kind of thrives them, so they kind of just keep it because it's working for them.
Right. You know, and she's a lot like the Watchtower in that if you question her or call her out on something, it's like, how dare you? You know, you can't question me. You know, and she gets all, yeah. Let's just say her and I never got along from day one. You know, like the first time I met her and her husband, you know, I didn't like ask for their daughter's hand in marriage. I told them I was marrying their daughter. And they said, well, we haven't discussed this. I said, there is no discussion. That I love her, I'm going to marry her. I said, now, you're welcome to come to the wedding if you want, but it's not necessary that you be there. You know, so that kind of set the ground rules for our relationship. And the crowd goes.
My daughter, my oldest daughter, her present husband, which is a really good guy. Okay, so her bio father was rather upset that he didn't go to him and request her hand in marriage. And in his mind, he's like, but that's kind of a disrespect back when like people and daughters were property. So he just like didn't do that because he really saw it as demeaning to do that. But there's these traditions that we don't quite know the beginnings of them, and we still expect them. But like he had a very good reason for not doing it, I thought. The guy's a good guy. I like him a lot.
That's all that counts, you know. The best we can hope for our kids is that they get hooked up with somebody who treats them well. You know, treats them with respect, treats them with love. You can't ask for more than that for your children.
My dad my kids used to, and I'd never asked them to do this. As they were growing up, if my mother called, they would come to me and say, do you want me to tell her you're taking a nap? Do you want me to say you're gone? Do you want me to tell her you don't feel good? Like they volunteered. They volunteered these excuses they could tell my mother. And when I look back, all I can figure is that they saw how it affected me after my mother spoke to me, and they didn't like seeing that. I mean, when I gave birth, she was forbidden. She was forbidden to be anywhere around me. Like she was the last person I want. You know, it's very common for someone to want their mommy at a time of such a vulnerability. I did not want her around me at all. I didn't trust her for a minute, you know.
At the birth, my mother wanted to be at the conception.
Your mother? Your mother?
Yeah, my mom
I don't think so.
You know.
Oh, she barely let you out. Okay, gotcha.
Yeah, she's very overprotective of me. So
wow.
She, never.
Because you were kind of.
My mother was a very unique individual. She would have to be to have me as a child.
It sounds like it.
Oh,
and if you're sickly and stuff, you know, it would be even more so. Yeah. Esther's mentioning that. So Esther was mentioning that she had an uncle whose mom interfered. She decided which curtains would go up on the windows in her son's and daughter-in-law's new house. Esther's like, that's just wrong. The daughter-in-law had no say. And then she mentioned that the daughter-in-law was disempowered and got depressed. That's what happens to us when we have no say in the organization. It gets us to this place that Esther's talking about, that she, you know, this other person who could not make these decisions. Somebody else came in and made them for her. So us in the Watchtower, we can't make certain decisions, and the leadership makes it for us. Enough of that happening. It just, she used the perfect word, disempowered her. It's just discouraging over and over and over again. You know, you think something's cool, something's okay, and then you get a talking to and find out how that's just not okay either. Ending with, you know, you really should put Jehovah first. It's like, oh my God.
Gary.
Guilt, obligation. I mean, fear, obligation, and guilt. Say that again?
Yeah. Fear, obligation.
Oh, you see Gary in the chat?
Gary in the chat saying, I really
Hi,
need
Gary.
someone to talk to. We're here, Gary.
So the number, Gary, is right here. You want to call in? You're very welcome to. The number is 727-731-0100. 6701. And we're pretty good listeners, you know. Even Tracy's wanting to know what's wrong. And see, I think that's something that we as ex-Jehovah's Witnesses, and that we survived leaving that organization. We did, you know, having somebody else tell our stories. When we hear these stories, they're not as outlandish as somebody from society at large listening to them. We hear them, we just like, okay, I get it. I understand. Because we understand the dynamics of this culture, you know?
Right. Yeah.
We got...
Hey, Bob is here too. Hi, Bob. Bob, lawyer.
Yes. Yes. Our future lawyer.
Talking to his Bible study friend about Stephen Lett's comments.
Oh, you got labeled an apostate. It's used as a slur. And it's like used as, now you're the bad person. Isn't that amazing? Let calls an infant an enemy of God, yet you're an apostate. I'm sorry, Gary, for laughing, but do you hear how preposterous this is? So this is blame shifting. Instead of him stopping and realizing, yeah, that was not a good thing to say. Instead of him doing that, he's got to attack you, your character. So that's ad hominem, an attack of you, rather than what the subject was, which was Let saying that rather than thinking of babies as little angels, more accurate, they're little enemies of God because they were born into sin. So, yeah. You did not deserve that, Gary. I'm so sorry you had to deal that. How do you call in? Gary's asked, how do I...
Let me ask Gary a question. Yeah. The number, Gary, you can call
I would like to...
right there on the bottom of the screen. And then...
by the phone?
Your, voice
727? Oh, you're telling him, okay.
Yeah. Yep. You'll hear a voice prompt when you just press *6 and you'll be able to talk. But Gary, let me just ask you one question. When you look at a baby, is your first thought that that's an enemy of God? Or do you think, look at that little bundle of joy, look at that little angel? So for Stephen Lett to even make that comment goes against our very nature, our very instinct when we see a baby. The first commandment God ever gave Adam and Eve was be fruitful and fill the earth with babies. So if babies are enemies of God, why would God want a world full of them? It doesn't make any sense.
It would be more acceptable to say, what an ugly baby. That baby is ugly. That's more socially acceptable than saying, like, look at that enemy of God. What? It is so outlandish. It's so
Stephen, if all babies are enemies of God, well, this isn't really a question, it's more like a comment. But Stephen, if all babies are enemies of God, it's probably a good thing you weren't at the manger. You know, Jesus was a baby.
Yes, he was. And I heard there was 3 wise men that kind of showed up after a while. And back then, birthdays weren't celebrated just by anyone. They were only celebrated by people of prominence. And women didn't celebrate birthdays either. It was it had to be somebody that was of prominence. And, you know, there was Mary and Joseph, and they seemed like a pretty humble couple. But these three wise men showed up and gave him these gifts that were like of real value. These were really nice gifts that they brought him. Whether he did this at birth or at the time he was 3, they finally showed up, you know?
Yep. Well, they didn't have GPS back then.
True. Tracy Harriet in the chat says, my husband used to call me an apostate as we headed to the hall. Oh, that's so horrible, you know? That is so horrible. So it's like after you've done everything to get ready and get yourself in the mood to go be spiritually fed, you have to hear that. That's another, it's used as a dehumanizing term and a slur and to talk you down. Yeah, you didn't deserve that at all, Tracy.
That's part of
I'm actually, yes.
They teach that anybody who questions, you know, not even if you say, I don't agree with this. If you just ask the question, then you're an apostate, and apostates are evil. Look up apostate in the dictionary. An apostate is simply somebody who chooses to believe something different than they believed before. In other words, it's somebody who changes their mind. And there's nothing evil about changing your mind. And, you know, they will say that an apostate, you know, Jehovah's Witnesses define an apostate as somebody who turns against God. That's not true. It's somebody who leaves Jehovah's Witnesses organization, but the vast majority end up going to a different church, or, you know, very few ex-JWs end up becoming atheists, you know, right off the bat. You know, it's not like they're rejecting God. They're just rejecting the cult.
Right.
Gary says when he calls, he loses connection. Well, now that could be an Illuminati conspiracy. I don't know. But
oh, goodness gracious.
Gary, you want to hear on the phone.
So so I'm asking him if he is in the U.S., because if you're not in the U.S., there's actually a different way of calling in. Yes, and it should be classified as hate speech, because it doesn't mean dictionary term where apostate means someone who's changed their political or religious belief system to either something else or nothing. And that's the definition of apostate. But they take that definition and load up a whole bunch more on top of it.
I still have a friend who's a JW, and him and I get, normally we're pretty civil with one another, but every now and then it'll get heated. And one time I said something, and he called me an apostate, and I said, your terminology is wrong. I'm not an apostate, I'm a heretic. Get it right.
Yep.
Gary's in Australia. That might explain the difficulty.
Oh, you know what you can do if you want to correct the post the screens of the Watchtower it'll have all the different countries, how to dial in, how will be free. Join the conversation. Talk to you, Pete.
Let's see.
Please repeat that, Susan, because I didn't hear it very well.
Okay, I'm sorry. If you go to the 6 screens of the Watchtower,
I have it in front of me right here.
Okay, scroll down, you will see there's a page page on there that has all the number codes for the phone number, and I'll give you there.
Yep.
Call in for free.
Hey, Gary, get a pen and paper and write this number down. Plus 612-402-229-113. That's the number for Australia. Bob's helping them out too.
Yes, I was hoping so.
Yep.
He tries very hard to include as many people as possible. Okay.
Gary says, thank you. I will figure it out. Yes.
Yeah, I agree. It was, it's funny when you wake up and you have a spouse and it's really tough. I think that's probably, there's so many people I think in the organization who wake up and then their spouse is still in. I think that's probably one of the toughest things that a person can go through.
You've mentioned that your husband is still in. And do you have children?
Yeah, we've actually been married, I think, about 24 years. And in fact, let's see, when I met Peter, he was an ex-elder, and he was disfellowshipped, and I just came out of a Christian school and had gone to college, and and he really didn't tell me anything about it until I married him. Then
wow.
started going to church, which I thought, well, all churches must be equal, So,
that's the normal thought. Yep.
Yep. And so I studied material, and I really didn't think that somebody would lie. It's not till later you realize that they do lie. They do twist things. And I think that, like we have 3 teenage daughters, and I don't really think it was until the kids got older that I started to see how crazy the organization was. They didn't want the kids to do sports. They didn't want them to associate with certain friends. And, I was in college, so I knew how important it was for the kids to have self-esteem. And you had to, do certain things to give them self-esteem, like attention. And the organization was basically the opposite. We wanted kids to feel bad about themselves. It's just, so silly.
Yeah, especially the girls.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, and they had, they had this elder that was stalking them on Instagram. And, I had enough. I was like, this is ridiculous. How dare that guy? And, I guess I had been self-recent for a long time because I would take my kids to the museums, and I wanted them to be as educated as possible and to have as many experiences as possible. And, it's, for some reason, that got me hooked. I started thinking the loving organization, that's not so loving when they send you for doing things for your kids and making sure your kids have self-esteem and stuff. And so that's what I experienced.
Yeah,
absolutely.
these things.
Children are supposed to be in subjection to the parent. The wife is supposed to be in subjection to the husband. The husband is supposed to be in subjection to the elders. The elders are in subjection to the governing body. And the governing body is everything.
Well, I felt, it was really odd to stand all the time, and I was just like, well, all I want to do is have this something and why is this crazy old guy, stalking my kids on Instagram, accusing them of all things, and, it was really upsetting, and then Peter, my husband, the more I learned, I knew something was right. So I started doing research, and I would ask them questions, and suddenly every time I would ask them a question, I would be apostate. Of course, I was my husband.
Yeah.
Has your husband been encouraged by the organization to leave you?
Yeah, actually, he has. We have. My husband, before he even went back to the organization, we have so much in common. I would say thank God for sweethearts first. But
I'm so glad to hear that.
Yeah, they said, so does your wife put you in spiritual danger? It's just like, no, absolutely not. But, they do. They do encourage that, which is, by the way, against the Bible and ridiculous. So they're just a bunch of hypocrites and evil. But, yeah, but it's taken over a year for my husband to finally relax about the fact that I want nothing to do with that false religion. So, yeah.
Yeah, they label that spiritual endangerment, and it's actually one of those things that is considered as spiritually okay to actually divorce over. Which that's never something you find out in the Bible study ever, ever. It's so horrible. I'm so glad to hear that your sweetheart's first. That means so much to me and that makes my heart happy.
Well, and also I think we have successful business. He's older than me. He's added on to it, but I don't think, he wants to have anybody else because we are sweethearts. But I think it's rare, and I think part of that is because we were sweethearts before the organization and God. So, otherwise I don't think we could stand each other. So, and I think I'm a lot nicer person since I left that organization because it made you so lonely and so judgmental. And now I'm just like, I love everybody. And I wish everybody happiness and goodness and love and kindness. And, I think we're better people because of that. Well, I was just going to say, I think that our hopelessness now, Peter, in fact, it's amazing to see how Peter is just relaxed towards our daughters. And our daughters both have boyfriends that are, as they would say, ugly. But, they're really nice boys. And the boys in this organization, they were sex brats. I mean, I can't imagine them making good husbands because they're just not nice people. I mean, I hate to say it, they just are so judgmental, and so they just have no normal love or compassion for women mostly. At least the boys that I saw.
That's for sure.
Yeah, we women have a lot.
Are all living a double life. We get all dressed up in our Sunday best, and we go to the meeting, and we're all smiles and love, and hugging, and chatting, and then it's like we go home and we turn back into them well we normally are the rest of the day. And it's like in my congregation, we had one of the other teenagers, loved playing soccer. And so he wanted to join the high school soccer team, but of course, those don't allow extracurricular sports like that. So what he did was he went to the coach of the team and said, I want to play, but I I can't use my real name. And they just made up a fictitious name and played into that. So, like, if he ever got a goal or something, you know, his name would appear in the paper, you know, and nobody knew that he was talking on a high school soccer team. You know, and yeah, you know, you're always, when you're in KW, you're always doing stuff, but you're looking over your shoulder. You know, you're always wondering if somebody is going to find out something again. And it may not even be anything bad. It's just something that the Watchtower says you shouldn't be doing, like playing a video game. You know, it can be something as innocent as that, yet you feel guilty about doing it because they instill that in you.
I just don't think that they want people to be happy. You know, if somebody just likes happiness and something being kind of outlawed, it's not what they want.
Well, that's it. You know, they don't want happy people because if somebody is not happy, they can control them by promising them happiness.
And informing them that they're the happiest people on earth.
They pretend to be the happiest people on earth while they're taking their Xanax and, you know, Lexapro and, you know.
I remember, me and my children were probably the happiest in the whole hall because I did everything but what they said to do. And so our kids were the only ones smiling and happy, and everybody else was so sad. I mean, it just was terrible to see.
You know, it's very oppressive to have to put on somebody else's personality for you to be pleasing to Jehovah. And it's expressed like it's a suit, right? So you take off your own suit jacket and you toss it aside because it's got dirt stains on it. It's kind of ripped a little bit. And you put on this new personality, which, you know, in the pictures of the Watchtower, it shows it's a nice suit jacket and everything. And but the thing is it doesn't fit us. It doesn't fit us. It's one of those, you know, one size fits all, and it does not fit us. So we're incredibly uncomfortable in it. And this actually leads to depression when you're not able to be who you are and you're supposed to be someone other than you are to receive acceptance. This really causes depression. It's horrible.
Oh, yeah. I remember, like, in my, when I was really starting to question the organization, and we had a meeting, there was a talk about, you know, putting on the Christian personality. So when we got home, my mother was talking to me. She said, "Wasn't that a good talk?" I said, "I don't think so." She said, "Why?" I said, "Well, the guy was talking about putting on the new Christian personality, like it's, you know, like something that you're dressing up in." I said, "Well, I tried putting on the, you know, Christian personality, but it was way too tight in the crotch."
Oh no. It takes away your manhood. I understand.
Yeah.
And it does this for many men in this organization. It really takes away their manhood. And for us women, we end up getting told that we are responsible for so many things, yet we have so little power. It's exhausting. It's literally exhausting functioning within this organization.
Well, I mean, all you have to do is say subservient to your husband, please God, please the organization, do nothing to help yourself or to be happy. But other than that, they don't expect much of you.
Yeah. It's really too bad. And the responsibility of our children becoming members has always been put more so on the mothers than the fathers, when the fathers are the spiritual heads of the family, right? But they've really made that a thing of the mothers.
Well, I'm really thankful that they did, because I know the girls be independent and self-reliant and economically successful. Thank God for that. You know, the men's organization, so girls have been any good enough. You know?
Yep. It's a very patriarchal organization.
It is. I usually go. Go ahead, Pete.
Well, I was saying, you know, I was raised by a single mom, and I saw the sacrifices my mother, you know, did, you know, for my benefit. You know, my mother could have had a much different life if I wasn't involved in it, and she sacrificed a lot for my sake. But I saw the way that the congregation treated her, and that just didn't sit well with me at all. You know, like, they always looked at my mother like she was a second-class citizen. You know, and to me, of course, I mean, every child, you know, loves their mother, and, you know, but I took that to a whole other level, you know, because I could see what my mother was doing, you know, as far as the sacrifices she made for me. So that made me put my mother on a whole other tier than most of the kids had to their mom. And to see the way the organization treated her, you know, it really pissed me off. You know, and that was kind of the thread that I had through the whole time when I was questioning it. I'm like, you know, these guys, this organization, how can they treat a woman like that and then talk about being a loving organization? It doesn't make sense.
Not a loving organization, and it sounds like your mother was really wonderful. That's how I was treated too. So because I think it's her, you know, it made strong young women, and they're happy and good and have self-esteem. And I have to say that I was not a congregation. None of them had that. So your mom was great.
Yeah, he did the best he could, and I was grateful for it. You know, I have friends whose moms, you know, weren't quite as good, and then I married a woman whose mother was, you know, so, you know, I know I had her. I was lucky. You know, I was blessed. You know, I got the mother lottery right there. The only bad thing my mother ever did was become a JW. And
that was simply because she had a good friend right, that turned her on to it.
That wasn't her fault. She got hooked during a vulnerable moment. Gary wants to know
I found out later.
If you want to, you know, I won't send you any spam. But if there are any MLM marketers on the channel, yeah, you might get some offers.
Yeah, he was saying he could use somebody to talk to, and if someone reaches out, an email would be a good way. Yeah, I didn't realize until later that a single mother was considered spiritually weak. I had no clue growing up. So my dad was hardly ever part of the organization. So my mother was, of course, considered, you know, like she would associate with other single mothers. And as I find this out, I'm thinking that's who she associated with, all the single mothers, you know. But yeah, if the father's not in the organization, or like yourself, Pete, you were a fatherless child according to the Watchtower, which is horrible because what they really were announcing was, men come and for men to come and mentor you. And somebody named Michael called in earlier today during Rick's show, and he was mentioning that they'll give these people instructions to do, such as don't wear that leisure suit and stuff. And if you complied, then you would be considered somebody suitable to be a ministerial servant or an elder later. But if not, your spirituality was being judged as well by not falling in line, But yeah, it's we were considered spiritually weak is what that was. And that comes along with a whole bunch of stuff that makes it to where you're not invited to certain things, and the cliques that I didn't even realize were happening, not a good thing.
It's like, small, because I said before, I was baptized at 9. I was giving talks to the Theocratic schools, and I was pioneering every summer. So while I was going on, they treated my mother okay because I was on the path to become a ministerial servant or an elder or even go to Bethel, But once it became clear that I was gotten off that path, that's when they started treating my mother differently. And it was so obvious, you could almost draw the demarcation line.
I believe it. I really do. Usually about this time, I like to switch over to being on the phone. And so I'll be leaving the live stream. And when I get to go to the phone, the conversation gets to be more casual. I'm trying to have us maybe stay on subject while we're on YouTube, and then we can just go to any subject when we're on the phone after I leave YouTube. And whereas before, I pretty much welcomed anything to go on at any time, whatever anybody wanted to talk about. But so in a few minutes, I'm going to be going to the phones, and anybody that's on here on YouTube, I encourage you to call into that 727 number, 731-6701. And what I heard Susan, Rick's wife, talking about is that if you go to the site called 6 Screens of the Watchtower, which you can just Google it, once you open that up, I believe you scroll down and it will show different countries, and somehow from that point you have access to call the show, and it doesn't cost you anything. I believe that's what Miss Susan had said. Is that how you heard it too, Pete? You might not remember.
I'm trying to read.
Oh, you're on the page of 6 Screens? Okay.
Yeah, I'm looking at it now.
That's our Pete. He goes to the source.
Yeah.
Okay.
I suppose once they call in, like when you call in America, my phone will tell me that this call is not on your plan and you'll be charged, 1 cent a minute. So I suppose if there's any fee that's going to be incurred, there'll be a message on your phone that goes to this.
Okay. Yeah, like Gary said, he was calling in and then he'd just get disconnected. So, Miss Susan, if you're available, could you repeat that? that would be really helpful, because I'm going to be leaving YouTube, and there's people here from like the UK, from Australia, and then other people here in the States, and I'm wanting to encourage them to call in and still be a part of the program. You know, it's like daytime where they're at. It's 12:05 a.m. here in the U.S. Sounds like somebody just tried to open up this the line. So I'm calling for Miss Susan, if you're available to repeat how somebody can call in when they're from another country. I believe you mentioned it earlier. So we're getting a bad echo, which I don't know why. It does sound like Susan's trying to come in. We're getting really bad echo, Susan. And when we get that sound, usually people have other windows open that need to be closed. That's usually how that echoing can be taken away. Nice. It's just finished. That's good. So I'm going to go ahead and switch over. If you could stay on the line, Pete. And I enjoyed myself tonight here on the YouTube channel. And I'll be switching over to the phone, which is 727-731-6701. And Susan said that there was a way, if you went to 6 Screens of the Watchtower, if you Googled that, somewhere on some screens, it helps you or shows you how you can call in from another country. So if you could look that up, that would be wonderful. And I just want to say thank you for everybody that called in tonight and that listened and took part in the show, and all of you in the chat. I really appreciate you guys. If you can give a thumbs up on the YouTube, it really helps with the algorithm, and I really appreciate that. I have to say that this is really the highlight of my week, and I always enjoy listening to things you have to say and talking with you and sharing with you the things I've learned. I very much appreciate you. So this is Apostate Linda James, your favorite apostate, and I'm going to leave the YouTube channel now and go straight to the phones. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.